everyone, welcome back. It's Friday. I'm not sure if I'll post this on Friday, but I will try. All right, so we're still in chapter 10, and I think this is gonna be the last part. The end chapters are much longer. So this next section is called Coda, 6 Hours with Roger Smith. Even now, more than a decade later, I get excited when I look at the host of documents I showed Kay that day. Flipping through them, I remember how I felt when I was first reporting on Manson's lost year in San Francisco. I thought I'd found the angle that would set my story apart from the reams of others. The beginnings of a working theory about what really motivated the Tate LaBianca murders. True, it had come too late to work for Premiere, but it could be the linchpin for my book. I pinned a lot of my hopes on one last interview, a sit-down with Roger Smith. It was set for late December 2001. My deal with Premiere had been off for a year and I was living off savings, but they were dwindling. If I wanted to earn more money, I'd have to finish my book proposal and sell it to a publisher. When I spoke to Smith, I knew I had to come away with something so solid that I could finish my reporting. And I sincerely believed that I could. To me, it was obvious that Smith had covered something up, and the evidence was so abundant on this point that I'd have no trouble confronting him about it. Even if our exchange got contentious, I would show him documents he hadn't seen in more than 3 decades. I would press him on his connections to the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, to Manson, to David Smith, and more. I would ask him why he'd never sent Manson back to prison and why he'd gone along with the bizarre plot to send him to Mexico. Needless to say, it did not work out like that. After the Manson murders, Smith had spent his career behind the well-fortified walls of numerous federal penitentiaries, where he ran specialized units studying or treating sex offenders and drug addicts. It was a path that afforded him plenty of privacy. Over the years, he lived on a yacht off the coast of Hawaii, in rural Bend, Oregon, and in a farmhouse more than a century old, surrounded by cornfields in Ypsilanti, Michigan, outside Ann Arbor. Man, that's interesting. I guess I've lived in the same little radius of not very far my whole life. So it always interests me when people have these, like they live in lots of different places. I hate moving. I've only moved 3 or 4 times in my whole life. And yeah, if I never have to do it again, that will be just fine with me. It's not my thing, especially like, so he's in California, he's in Hawaii, he's in Oregon, and then he's in Michigan, and just such like varied types of settings, like an island, cornfields, centuries old. I mean, they're just such different types of surroundings. For me, I'm boring. I don't like that many surprises and having to figure out new stuff. Yeah, I guess I am boring. That's okay. Smith had agreed to the interview without a moment's hesitation, though I'd called him out of the blue. He was preparing to retire after a decade as director of the Bureau of Mental Forensics for the Michigan State Penitentiary System, and he claimed that none of the many people from his circle I'd interviewed by then had said anything to him about me. Like, who are you, Tom O'Neill? On the phone, he told me that he'd been reticent about Manson over the years for fear that the affiliation would tarnish his career. Yeah, I would think so, especially given how much leniency he showed him. I'm close to retirement now, he said, so maybe it's okay to talk. Our interview began in his office at the prison. It ended at his beautifully restored farmhouse, nearly 6 hours, a pizza, and several bottles of wine later. It was late December and snow was falling. Outside, the fields were blanketed in white, and the houses, his included, twinkled with Christmas lights. Smith lived with his second wife, Carmen, who sat with us in the living room for almost the entirety of the interview. A fire roared in the hearth. Soft rock emanated from a station he'd found on satellite TV. The couple was unfailingly courteous, and I found Smith a patient listener. Only a few times did he betray any frustration with my lines of questioning, even as I forced him to examine papers he hadn't seen in 35 years. But the fact was this: he gave me nothing. That's what I was gonna say. Why ruin your golden years like dredging up all this stuff, if it were me at least? On the most important questions about his relationship with Manson, He pleaded ignorance or claimed he had no memory at all. Isn't that convenient? I've never been able to understand how he ended up under your supervision in San Francisco if he was paroled in LA, I said. I really don't know either, Smith said. He posited that parole protocols were more relaxed back in the 60s and that officials just didn't care if Manson took himself to another city. Different time then, I think. I don't think. I don't know, but I don't think so. Smith had a memory of interviewing Manson as part of his pre-release from prison, a routine process that couldn't have involved him, at least not officially, if Manson was released in Los Angeles. Well, I guess I didn't, he replied when I told him that. I don't even remember that he was released out of LA. Once again, convenient. But I thought I'd have him dead to rights on the question of Manson's arrest during his parole supervision. Yeah, especially because he was his one and only client at that time. He went from having, 30 or 40 down to just one, and he doesn't remember? I'm not buying it. I had him look over the letter he'd sent to Washington, D.C., asking for permission for Manson to travel to Mexico. He was actually in jail then in Ukiah, I told Smith. Really? I was never notified. Once again, yeah, right. This is a mystery to me. I should have been notified. By Manson or by the people who arrested him, I asked. By the people who arrested him, Smith said. There would be some federal record of his arrest, convictions, incarcerations, his criminal justice status. Yeah, I'm sure there was. Would his parole have been violated for that arrest? Oh, absolutely. I didn't know it at the time, but Smith was right in a way. There were two federal documents, Manson's FBI rap sheet and his Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation record, listing his July 31st, 1967 conviction, proving that the government had been notified. Okay, I guess I'll give him a small pass. Small. The first of those documents dated to the time of Smith's supervision, so he would have been notified too. The probation office received such papers as a matter of course, but he was saying he wasn't. For good measure, I checked with another federal parole officer who worked in the Bay Area in that era. He confirmed that the Justice Department would have automatically notified Smith of Manson's conviction. Even back then, he said, the federal guys didn't mess up. Okay, so there goes my giving him a pass. Whenever I reread my interview transcripts, I winced at moments like this. I prepared diligently for these conversations, especially in cases where I thought the right questions could bring major new revelations. Reliving marathon interviews like this, I sometimes kick myself even for having had to stop the conversation to go to the bathroom. Maybe if I hadn't taken a break, things would have gone differently. Even now, I wonder what could have happened if I'd held off on confronting Smith until I'd marshaled every possible resource. In 2001, for example, I hadn't yet found the glowing recommendation he'd provided for Susan Atkins, effectively winning her probation a year before the murders. If I'd had that, I could have challenged a bunch of the assertions he made about Atkins that night. He called her a hard lady, and he hoped that she never got out of prison. She was scary. She was aggressive. I thought she was sort of Charlie's operative. Quite an about face from the man who claimed in 1968 that Atkins would comply willingly with any probationary conditions aimed at her rehabilitation. I pointed out that Manson had apparently continued to invoke Smith's name after their parole relationship dissolved. Manson and the girls continued visiting him at his office at the free medical clinic and even at his home, I told Smith. I think he was still trying to pass you off as his PO. But all he had to say on the subject was, "Oh, really? I'm not buying what this dude's selling." When Smith said he had never been asked to testify at the trial, despite having served as an expert witness in lots and lots of trials, I told him and his wife how much that baffled me. They seemed perplexed too. I asked, was there something going on behind the scenes that your testifying would have exposed? Maybe a little federal bureaus of this or that involved? A big picture that they didn't want exposed? Maybe like in LA, where they kept releasing him for offenses without charging him when they had evidence against him? Yeah, LA police scene was pretty corrupt, at least at that time. I don't know about now. For the first time, Smith lost his temper. Okay, you're operating from the theory that I was tied in, something else was going on? Tom, I can't help you. I don't know. His face reddened and he shouted, I really don't know. It's kind of like a methinks thou protest too much kind of situations in my mind. Because you were part of his gestating phase in San Francisco, I thought maybe you might have an indication. Yeah, I saw his talent. I saw his bullshit. He was very glib, Smith said. I had known for a long time how powerful his effect was on people. His particular brand of psychobabble was as persuasive as anybody on the street. Well, that didn't stop you from fostering his child. I don't know. I think he's just a little too, what's the word? A little defensive. Let's put it at least that way. He reminded me that San Francisco in the late 60s may as well have been another country. So different were its customs and mores. I was sympathetic to a point. By then I'd spoken to so many people about this period that it felt at once totally near and completely alien. So many of my sources, even the most reliable, had trouble explaining their feelings and motivations, not just because so much time had passed, but because some schism stood between them and the past. It was irreparable. Wherever the 60s had come from, they were gone, even in memory. Well, everyone was high back then, so that's probably why the memories were gone. As we refilled our wine glasses, Smith conjured the scene. It was a time when birth control pills first became widely available. You will find this absolutely stupid. Women used to walk around and pull up their sweaters to show that they didn't have bras, and they would actually seek you out to have sex. Unheard of, he continued. Then comes the whole drug thing. Then comes the Haight-Ashbury. The whole Bay Area was one of the most electric places you could possibly be. It was like a magnet. It sounds gross to me, but maybe I'm just a prude. I don't think so, but it just sounds gross. Ugh. Manson, he said, had arrived at the tail end of this innocence. When Smith traded his parole job for the ARP, he remembered the hate already yielding to speed, the beginning of one of the most incredibly destructive patterns of drug use I'd ever seen. The first 6 months I was there were 30 murders within like a 6-block radius. Yikes. Of the office we had. It was the middle class, totally naive kids. It was the worst, stupid theater that you've ever seen. Well, liken it to those rats that were on speed and how violent they got and they ripped each other to shreds. I mean, it's not too much of a stretch, really. In a scene like that, the Charlie Mansons of the world were a dime a dozen. Were they, though? They didn't all go on to do the things that he did. The Haight was so flooded with weirdos, seekers, addicts, and guru figures that no one batted an eye at him. Yeah, but everyone remembered him. Like, the more people that you listen to, they're like, oh yeah, everyone knew him, everyone remembered him. So I think he did stand out. If anything, Smith said Manson was a little more respectable than many of them, insofar as he eschewed speed and asked his followers to do the same. He was very odd. He was a hippie, it was clear. He was very manipulative, but was he highly dangerous? Didn't see it. I did let him travel, and there were some checks and balances. Basically, when he was in the Bay Area, he was in my office every week. I saw him a lot. Not only in the office, he came in with his girls after a while, and I think that became kind of an annoyance to the office. Yeah, more than likely. I made a mental note of that comment. It seemed to confirm that Manson was visiting Smith for official parole meetings at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. Later, he backed away from it, and I seem to recall there weren't a whole lot of records of him coming in, on paper anyways. My association with the clinic really was pretty intermittent, he said. It wasn't until after I left federal probation that I came down there. I think he's going to catch him in some of these lies. The chronology confuses me, I said. People at the clinic all thought he was coming in for probation. No, I had left probation. So he was just coming in to say hello? First of all, he didn't come in that often, Smith said. I never saw him in any official way, and I also never invited him. There could be nothing untoward about Manson's appearances at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. He implied, because a conspiracy takes careful planning, and no one there had the capacity to plan anything. Well, people up above them maybe did have that capacity. Nothing happened according to schedule in the Haight-Ashbury. You had people walking around jacked up on 2 grams of speed, tempered out with heroin, and people carrying guns and tweaking on acid, and it was absolutely crazy. Actually, Charlie and his girls were the sanest people around in some ways. Well, that's saying something. That claim shouldn't have surprised me. Manson had endeared himself to Smith. They were close enough that Smith felt comfortable taking care of Manson's baby. He looked after the child for a couple of months, I think. I know it was long enough to have the baby circumcised, which I think really pissed him off. Why would you get someone else's baby circumcised? That is crazy. When we'd finished our pizza and made our way through most of the final bottle of wine, I steered Smith back toward the subject of Manson's psychology. I still feel that he was trying to have it both ways, to acknowledge Manson's anger and instability, and sometimes in the same breath, to downplay the eccentricities of a man who started a cult as Smith watched on. Maybe he was doing it just for the research aspect. He was a student. I don't know. It was probably fascinating from that standpoint, although highly unethical, I'd say. There was this unquestioned loyalty to Charlie while they were in San Francisco, but there was almost a good-natured quality to it, Smith told me. There was still the ability to joke with him and push him. In his mind, the move to Spawn Ranch was fatal in that it took the family out of society. They were isolated. They were doing acid every day, and they were essentially without any reality checks at all. There's a time when everything flips, and I don't know when that was, but it sure as hell wasn't when he was in San Francisco with me, right? Of course it wasn't then. Explaining why he refused to talk about Manson for more than 25 years, he said there were a lot of people who became overnight experts on Manson, particularly back then. Even now, I'm prepared to tell you to get the fuck out of here at some point. You understand what I'm doing here and what's important, which is me. The thing is, Tom, as I look back on that time, I don't know what else I could have done. I felt real sadness about it. I don't feel any culpability. Well, okay. That about summed it up. Soon I thanked Smith and his wife for their generosity and got to my feet. We'd all had some wine, and there was a warmth, if not a trust, in their rustic old farmhouse. I remembered suddenly that it was almost Christmas. They led me to the back door, both of them waving as they saw me out, flakes of snow still falling from the night sky. In my rental car, I took the old highway back past the prison that Smith worked at. Apparently, he'd personally planned their new $10 million mental health care facility. The thought of it made me feel small. He'd been more than accommodating, hadn't he? And he'd taken a serious look at the papers I'd found, had given serious consideration to my questions. On the face of it, I had no reason to be dissatisfied, having just gotten hours of tape from one of the most reclusive officials connected to Charles Manson. There's going to be a plot twist here, I'm gathering. And yet, as I dwelled on it, the interview felt strange and inconclusive. The closer I got to my motel, the sadder I got. I wasn't finished with the story, or even close to finished. I'd gone to Michigan expecting to shock Roger Smith with incontrovertible evidence of everything he'd overlooked. He had reacted basically with 6 hours of shrugging and some free wine and pizza. Soon enough, I'd transcribe the interview and start to work away at the little inconsistencies and contradictions in Smith's account. But at the moment, I was crestfallen. Even supposing I could find something to push back on, was I right about any of it? Or had Smith entertained 6 hours of questioning from someone peddling conspiracy theories? Well, I think in the CIA they do train you on how to take interrogations, right? Maybe Smith had some training. You know, it's funny. I was gonna say maybe that's a conspiracy theorist in me, but I was reading some comments. There's this guy who just started watching the Ethel Kennedy series, and he put in the comments, I think you get too carried away with conspiracy theories and you need to read other things. And I responded, no way, buddy. Something like that. Like, no way. I love conspiracy theories. I love them. And they're not always theories. A lot of them end up being facts. So, you know what? I'm just going to keep on. One of these days I'm going to show up with a tinfoil hat on just to give you guys a little laugh. I'm definitely tinfoil enthusiast, for sure. You've probably noticed that by now if you've watched my other stuff. His denials felt wrong to me, but I'd had hours to prove my case to him, to get him to break, and I hadn't. I headed back home to Philadelphia for the holidays. No one knows me better than my family, and over the Christmas break, they noticed right away that something was off. I was aloof, skipping meals to work on the book proposal and figure out my next moves. Stuck in my own head, going through the paces of my story, I tried to construct a coherent narrative out of the interview transcripts and dozens of discarded drafts of my dead premiere piece. With no new revelations from Roger Smith, the ending was a big blank. I'd also told my father sheepishly that I was running out of money. He generously offered me a loan, as much as I needed to keep me afloat, and I accepted. I meant it when I promised I'd pay him back. My father was a tax attorney and law professor, and I realized that I'd never given him a full debriefing on my reporting, even as it became increasingly legalistic. That Christmas, I filled him in on everything I'd learned, walking him through my collection of 3-ring binders, their pages now dog-eared and marked with a rainbow of neon highlights and plastic reference tabs. To my relief, I watched as my sober-minded father transitioned to my thinking. He told me that he never trusted Bugliosi, too arrogant, too flamboyant, and now he was ready to roll up his sleeves, take out his red pen, and help me in the best way he knew how, by arguing with the U.S. government for records. Ooh, this is probably where it got pretty interesting. This is a twist that we didn't see coming, right? With his legal knowledge, he helped me fill out new FOIA requests and file appeals to old ones. In the coming months, and for several years, he accomplished what I'd been unable to, forcing unwilling bureaucrats to fill in redacted documents and release information in dribs and drabs. It wasn't enough, of course, to fill in all the gaps, but it got me closer to the truth. It's probably fun working with his dad too, kind of a bonding experience, huh? And it would never have been possible if I hadn't won over my old buttoned-up dad. He believed in what I'd found. He had the same questions that I did, especially about the parole board's reluctance to release Manson's file. Why were they hiding all this? Everything about the case should be publicly available, he thought. His skepticism kept me going. Same thing, his I don't know what the guy's title was, but the one who hired him to do the premiere piece and kept giving him money for that long period of time, he believed in it too. Because there was nothing there? No, because it was very compelling. After the new year, he drove me to the airport so I could fly back to LA. I'll never forget the father-son pep talk he gave me. It doesn't matter to us, he said, if you're never able to prove all this. The fact that you tried so hard is all that matters to us. I headed back to the West Coast feeling reinvigorated, aware of how lucky I was to have my family behind me. At least I thought I could have my book out in time for the 40th anniversary of the murders in 2009. Well, we know that didn't happen because this is another 10 years or so after that. Anyways, that, my friends, is the end of chapter 10. Finally. Just 2 more chapters to go and we will be done. I hope you guys are all enjoying it and hanging in and putting up with my very slow progress. Like I said, this new job has not only changed, it's a different workflow. It's the same job, but same but different. But it's just a different environment. Like I said, like there's windows all around. I don't just have the privacy to shut out the world and just hammer out episodes like I could in my old office. And y'all know I got a pack of crazy kiddos at home. So, and also I don't make any money doing this, so I can't justify, building a, she shed or something to make episodes in. But who knows, maybe one of these days. I think I have 876 subscribers right now, and you have to get to 1,000, I believe, to be monetized, which I am not. Also though, reading stuff like this, which not that many people have liked, but the stuff that you talk about in these gets you demonetized on YouTube. So I don't know. Even if I do get to 1,000 subscribers, who knows? Who knows? Like I said, my first job, as you can see around me, is this. This is just a fun little book club for me and my friends that are still sticking around. I do consider you guys friends, and I do appreciate every bit of it. And thanks again for all the subscribers. And yep, we're gonna finish this one pretty soon and move on to something new, something lighter, let's say, for sure. This has been heavy, and I know not a lot of people have loved it. So maybe something more in the vein of what we started with. It won't be a Kennedy thing, but at least I don't think so. Nah, it won't be a Kennedy thing. I love the Kennedy stuff, but it won't be that. At least not for the next one. All right, you guys, thanks for putting up with me once again. I will see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves. Have a great weekend.